He was the 16th President of the United States of America, and his reign from 1861 to 1865 fell on the darkest, bloodiest, and perhaps most fateful period in American history, the Civil War. It was a time of unprecedented, destructive upheavals when the country was split into two irreconcilable parts, the industrially developed North and the agrarian, slave-owning South. Millions of people were caught up in an unprecedented conflict in which brothers fought against brothers. Families were torn apart by political disagreements and deep ideological differences, and the very future of America, its existence as a single, indivisible nation, hung in the balance. It seemed that it was about to disintegrate into small, warring states that could become easy prey for outside forces. But Lincoln did more than survive the heat of war and cutthroat political intrigue. He led the country to victory, preserved the Union from the brink of disintegration, and forever changed the course of history by ending slavery, America's age-old shame and greatest injustice. You probably wonder, how did he manage it? What special, almost mystical qualities, what incredible inner strength helped him to go through such inhuman trials, to withstand endless, sometimes merciless attacks from critics from all sides, from the hawks of the North, who demanded an immediate and harsh victory, and from the doves, who wanted peace at any price, and of course from the South, which saw him as a tyrant, to resist even betrayal and intrigues within his own circle, among his closest comrades, and not to break under the enormous, unbearable pressure of war, losses, and merciless political intrigues that could break anyone. Today I offer you a deep, detailed, and maximum detailing of his 5 main secrets of survival in the cruel world of politics, written in the most simple and understandable words, and with the goal of not only informing, but also truly captivating you with this amazing, almost unbelievable story of a great leader whose legacy, lessons, and principles are still relevant today and can be applied in a variety of areas of life. And the first such secret was a strong belief in one's principles. Just imagine a huge, powerful sailing ship that found itself in the very center of a terrible, destructive storm in the open ocean. The waves rise to the sky. They are huge, like moving mountains of water. The wind roars with furious force, tears off the sails and breaks the masts. It seems that the ship is about to fly apart into splinters and go to the bottom, without a single chance of salvation. What helps it stay afloat, not go underwater and not crash into underwater reefs or coastal rocks? Of course, it is its strong, heavy, reliable anchor, which clings deeply to the bottom, preventing the ship from drifting or being thrown onto the rocks. For Abraham Lincoln, the unshakable anchor that kept him in place and from getting lost in the chaos were his first and deepest principles. He believed in these two things with all his might, with all his soul, with every fiber of his being, and this belief was not just an empty political slogan or a convenient phrase for speaking to a crowd, but a deep, vital, fundamental conviction from which he never, under any circumstances, retreated, even under the threat of defeat or death. For Lincoln, the very idea of the United States as a single, indivisible entity was not just a legal formality or a political arrangement, but a sacred, almost religious value. It was more than just a collection of territories or states linked by treaties. It was the embodiment of the ideal of liberty and self-government. He believed that this great country created by the Founding Fathers could not be allowed to disintegrate into separate, warring, weak states that might in the future fight each other or fall under the influence of other hostile powers. This belief was his guiding star, his unwavering compass in the darkest and most desperate times of the war when all seemed lost. He knew deep down that if the Union fell apart, the very idea of democracy, the idea of equality and freedom for all people, would be threatened not only in America, but throughout the world. He saw America as the last best hope of the earth, as a great experiment in self-government, as a shining example of how people of different beliefs and backgrounds could live together in freedom and equality, resolving their differences peacefully. He was absolutely convinced that if this unique experiment failed, it would be a great, irreparable tragedy for all mankind, proof that democracy does not work and that people are incapable of governing themselves. This was his fundamental core, on which all his actions and decisions rested, his central, non-negotiable goal. Also deeply believed that slavery was a huge, terrible, monstrous evil that went against the very principles on which America was founded. He believed that all men are created equal, as the Declaration of Independence so clearly and unequivocally proclaimed. This phrase was not just words to him, but a guiding truth that needed to be put into practice. Although he did not advocate immediate and complete emancipation of all slaves throughout the country for a long time, especially early in his presidency, for complex political reasons, his primary concern to preserve the Union and the need not to alienate the so-called border states, such as Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, Delaware, where slavery still existed but which had not seceded from the Union, he eventually took the decisive, bold, and historic step of issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. This was due to his deep moral convictions, which only grew stronger over time and became his driving force. He understood that the future of a great nation could not be built on the foundation of such injustice, such humiliation and human suffering, for it would contradict everything he believed in and would make the Union's victory meaningless, half-hearted. He saw that the abolition of slavery was not just a military measure, but also the fulfillment of America's ideals, the completion of its unfinished business in building a free society for all. He was convinced that slavery, as a moral plague, was destroying the very soul of the nation and must be eradicated. You may then ask, why was this strong belief in principles so important to his political survival and success? And I will answer that in moments of great, crushing crisis, when everything around is collapsing, when people doubt everything, themselves, their government, the future of the country, when friends can become enemies and enemies seem invincible. A very strong, unshakable internal support. A solid foundation is needed. Lincoln never, not for a minute, even in the most desperate moments, lost sight of his main fundamental goals. He could change the way to achieve the goal. He could choose different paths and tactics. He could retreat and maneuver. But the goal itself, to preserve the Union and completely free the slaves, he never changed. It was unshakable, like a rock against which the waves crash. This absolute clarity and unwavering purpose gave him incredible, almost mystical strength and helped him move forward, even when many advised him to give up, when everything seemed hopeless, when he himself experienced the deepest doubts and personal tragedies, such as the death of his son. People around him felt this unshakable confidence, this iron will, and saw that he was fighting not for personal gain, not for power for the sake of power or glory, but for something much greater. For the future of the country and for higher justice, for an ideal that was higher than his personal interests. This helped him to rally supporters around him who believed in him despite all the difficulties, to inspire the army to desperate battles and to find inexhaustible strength to fight, even when he himself felt on the verge of despair and depression. It is when you are so unwavering in your core beliefs that it is very, very difficult to lead you astray, because you yourself know exactly where you are going, and no external factors, no difficulties can break you or make you turn away from your chosen path because you have a clear moral compass and an unwavering faith in your ideals. For example, when the southern states, one after another, began to secede from the Union at great speed, declaring their secession from the United States and forming the Confederacy, many politicians in Washington were completely at a loss, not knowing what to do, how to react to such an unprecedented event. Some influential politicians and even very famous newspapers of that time, fearing the war and its unpredictable consequences, believed that it was necessary to simply let the southern states go in order to avoid a bloody and terrible war. They thought that it would be easier, that it would solve the problem in a good way, without violence. But Lincoln, from the very beginning of his presidency, took a firm, unwavering position. The Union must be preserved at any price, no matter what it takes, even at the cost of war. He did not hesitate for a moment, did not doubt his decision, even when it led to the outbreak of armed conflict. He deeply understood that if even one state were allowed to secede from the country, others would follow suit, like a domino effect, and America would cease to exist as a united, strong, and free country, would fall apart, which would ultimately lead to even greater troubles, chaos, and possible disintegration into many small, warring states. This firmness set the tone for his entire presidency from the very beginning and made it clear to everyone that he would not retreat from his principles, even in the face of great mortal danger. He was prepared to go to civil war to preserve the unity, freedom, and future of the country, and this determination was clear to every citizen who watched his actions and listened to his speeches. He did not simply talk about principles, he acted, demonstrating his steadfastness at every step, accepting full responsibility for the fate of the nation. And we will move on to the second secret that was in his wonderful, be able and flexible M. Just imagine a strong, powerful tree that stands in an open field during a strong, destructive hurricane. If this tree is too rigid, its trunk does not bend under the gusts of wind, it will most likely just break in half and fall to the ground, destroyed by the elements. But if it is flexible enough, its branches and trunk can bend under the pressure of the wind, accept its force, and then return to their original position. It will be able to withstand the onslaught of the elements and remain intact, survive, and continue to grow. Abraham Lincoln was exactly like that. He was incredibly flexible in his policies, his approaches, his strategies and methods of management. He understood perfectly well that in such a turbulent, unpredictable, and dangerously changeable time as the Civil War, when the situation changed literally every day, bringing new challenges and new problems, one must be able to adapt to new circumstances, change tactics depending on the situation at the front and in the rear, look for new, sometimes non-standard ways to solve problems, and even compromise if it is absolutely necessary, in order to ultimately achieve the main supreme goal, the preservation and unification of the country. It is worth saying that Lincoln was not a stubborn person who always, in all situations, did everything his own way, regardless of what was happening around him. New challenges or obstacles that appeared. If some plan or strategy did not work, did not bring the desired result on the battlefield or in politics, he was ready to abandon it, without clinging to it emotionally or out of principle, and try something completely different, sometimes even radically opposite. He was constantly looking for the best way forward, even if this path was unexpected, caused criticism from his supporters, or was not liked by everyone without exception. He was not afraid to admit his mistakes or the shortcomings of past plans, and was ready to instantly change course if a changed situation or fresh data required it. For him, the main goal justified flexibility in the choice of means, but never moral principles. Also knew how to use every opportunity that came his way, even if it seemed small, insignificant, or not obvious, for his strategic purposes. For example, his decision to free the slaves, which became known as the Emancipation Proclamation. It was a very bold, revolutionary, and risky step that radically changed the entire course of the war, but Lincoln used it not only as a moral appeal for justice and humanity, which was completely consistent with his principles and had been suffered for a long time, but also as a powerful military tool. He knew perfectly well that if the slaves in the South were declared free, this would significantly weaken the economy and the army of the Confederacy, because slaves were the main labor force that supported the Southern plantations, all production and, in fact, the supply of the army. Moreover, freed slaves could join the Union Army, which provided an additional influx of soldiers, strengthening the strength of the North while weakening the strength of the South. It was a very smart, far-sighted, and flexible move that simultaneously solved both a moral and a strategic military problem, depriving the enemy of resources and stimulating the escape of slaves from the Confederacy, creating chaos behind enemy lines and pulling public opinion in Europe to its side. Another striking example of his political flexibility is the way he formed his cabinet, his team that was to work side by side with him. He consciously and purposefully included people who were his former political rivals. For example, William Seward, a former rival for the presidential nomination, became Secretary of State. Salmon Chase, another contender for the presidency, was appointed Secretary of the Treasury. Edwin Stanton, an earlier critic of Lincoln, became Secretary of War. Those who competed with him for the presidency, and sometimes even those who personally disliked him, openly criticized him, sometimes even insulted and tried to undermine his authority. You may be wondering why do this, but it's all very simple. Because he considered them capable, talented, intelligent, and experienced, and he understood that to save the country, he needed the best, the smartest, and the most experienced minds, regardless of personal relationships, past disagreements, or political intrigues. He tolerated their criticism, their constant arguments, their disagreements, and even their insubordination in some matters, if it did not interfere with the main supreme goal, saving the Union and the country. This required enormous strength of spirit, self-control, incredible patience, and a willingness to put aside personal ambitions and grievances for the sake of a common, much more important cause. He understood that it was better to have strong people on the team, even if they created difficulties, than weak but obedient ones. It is also important to consider why was this so important for his political survival and success in such a difficult era. In fact, in politics, especially in periods of great upheaval and crisis, such as war, unexpected problems, unforeseen obstacles, and sharp turns of events, often arise that cannot be predicted or planned in advance. If a politician is too rigid, inflexible, and unwilling to change in accordance with new circumstances, he will very quickly find himself in a dead end. He will stubbornly beat his head against the wall, ignoring other options, instead of finding a door, going around an obstacle, or changing direction. Lincoln's flexibility allowed him to maneuver, find workarounds, adapt to the constantly changing situation at the front, in Congress, in public opinion, and on the international arena. He did not cling to old ideas, outdated methods, or broken plans when new ones proved more effective or when circumstances changed dramatically. He was willing to take risks, try new things, experiment with different approaches, which gave him a huge advantage over less adaptive and more rigid opponents who acted according to a pattern or on principle, ignoring reality. This ability to adapt was key to his political longevity and successful leadership. We know that Lincoln searched long and hard for a suitable general who could lead the Union troops to victory over the Southerners. He changed several commanders, including such famous and popular figures as George McClellan, who was very talented in organizing the army and was loved by the soldiers, but turned out to be too cautious and slow in battle, constantly postponing decisive actions and not using his advantages. Every time one general failed to cope with the task or his actions did not bring the desired result on the battlefield, Lincoln, without hesitation but with pain, gave another a chance. He did not despair over failures, did not panic, but kept searching until he finally found Ulysses S. Grant, who eventually led the Union to victory by using aggressive, decisive, and relentless tactics. Grant was willing to suffer great losses for the sake of the overall victory, something that previous generals lacked. This shows his incredible flexibility, patience, and tenacity in finding the right solutions and the right people. Despite constant criticism, disappointments, and numerous failures that accompanied him on this difficult path. And we move on to the next secret in listening to everyone and collecting information. In the modern world, we are accustomed to a huge, often contradictory flow of information from various, sometimes questionable sources, which may be unreliable or biased. But even in the 19th century, during such a large-scale and complex war, there were many rumors, gossip, unverified data, incomplete information, and distorted reports that could confuse any leader, lead him to erroneous, even fatal decisions. Lincoln understood perfectly well that in order to make the right, wise, balanced, and, most importantly, effective decisions, you need to have the maximum amount of reliable and complete information from a variety of sources. He was not a person who jumped to conclusions based on emotion, intuition, or the first opinion that came to mind. He was very inquisitive, attentive, and liked to ask a lot of questions to get to the bottom of the truth, to understand all the nuances, hidden motives, and potential consequences of his actions. Interestingly, Lincoln was known for listening extremely carefully to every interlocutor, regardless of their status, rank, or personal relationship with him. He did not simply wait for his turn to speak or interrupt to express his opinion. He really tried to deeply understand the other person's point of view, their arguments, their concerns, their experiences, and their vision of the situation. He met regularly, every day, with many people from all walks of life: generals, cabinet ministers, senators, state governors, members of the press, ordinary citizens, farmers, workers, and sometimes even private soldiers and nurses returning from the front to hear their stories, their eyewitness accounts. He listened to their stories, their problems, their suggestions and advice, trying to understand the mood of society, the army, and the various political groups. He valued the diversity of opinions and looked for valuable nuggets of truth that could help him make the best decision. Also always tried to get to the bottom of any problem, any situation, any report. If he heard something, he did not take it at its word, but rechecked it from different sources, compared data, looked for confirmation or refutation, analyzed facts, figures, and reports. He read a huge number of newspapers, both northern and southern, to understand the arguments of both sides and public sentiment, studied official military reports, thousands of letters from the front from ordinary soldiers and officers, analyzed intelligence data that could be encrypted or hidden from the general public. He wanted to see the whole picture in all its details, in all its complexity and contradictions, and not just what they wanted to show him or what was beneficial to certain people or factions. Abraham deeply understood that it is in information, especially the most unsightly or inconvenient truth, that the key to the right and safe decision, to the survival of the nation and the achievement of victory, is hidden. In his cabinet, in his inner circle, there were often people with very different, sometimes even directly opposing, political views and beliefs. Instead of trying to force them to think alike or to choose one side in an argument, Lincoln actively encouraged them to express their opinions, even if they contradicted his own or were very harsh and critical of his policies. He believed that only by hearing all sides, all the arguments for and against, all the risks and benefits of each decision, could he make the most balanced, considered, comprehensive and wise decision. This allowed him to see potential problems and weaknesses in plans before they became insoluble disasters, and to avoid the one-sidedness that often ruins politicians. He valued intellectual discussion, even if it was heated, because it helped to reveal the truth. But why was this so important to his political survival and success in such a difficult era? In politics, especially in a time of crisis and unpredictability like war, decisions must often be made very quickly, under great pressure. But the consequences of these decisions can be disastrous for the entire country, for millions of lives, and for the future of the nation. Lincoln knew that bad information based on rumor or distorted data, or hasty conclusions based on emotion, could lead to defeat in war, mutinies in the army, loss of popular support, or international conflicts that could make matters worse. By collecting and carefully analyzing all available information, he could anticipate problems, accurately assess risks, and then choose the best, safest, and most effective course of action. His decisions were more informed, more thoughtful, and therefore more successful than those of many other leaders. He avoided the many traps that less informed or more arrogant politicians of his day routinely fell into, relying on intuition or prejudice. He was like an experienced chess player who sees several moves ahead, because he knows all the possible developments and their consequences based on complete and verified data, not on guesswork or predictions. It is worth remembering that Lincoln frequently, almost every night, personally visited the military telegraph office, which was located in the Department of Defense building, not far from the White House. He sometimes stayed there until late at night or even into the morning to read the telegrams himself. He did not wait for the morning official reports or brief summaries that might be embellished, abbreviated, or even distorted by subordinates trying to present the situation in the best light. He read the telegrams coming directly from the battlefields from generals, commanders, and other officers. He wanted to be aware of events in real time, to see raw, unprocessed data, without filters or interpretations, to better understand what was happening. What were the casualties? What were the movements of enemy and friendly troops? What was the mood of the soldiers at the front and in the rear? This allowed him to stay one step ahead of his opponents and react to changes in the situation faster than they could imagine, making operational decisions that were sometimes critical. His workday was unusually long and difficult because he was always looking for new, fresh, and reliable information that could help him in his difficult fight for the survival of the nation, and he trusted only the data that he could verify and analyze himself. And the fourth secret of his survival was patience and strategic thinking. We know that a marathon is not a sprint. You cannot run it in a few minutes or even hours. It is a long, grueling distance that requires enormous endurance, an iron will, and precise calculation of every step, every breath. The same applies to large, fundamental political goals, especially during such a large-scale, grueling, and long war as the Civil War, where every day brought new losses, new challenges, and new difficulties. Lincoln had enormous, almost inhuman patience and a unique ability to think strategically. That is, to see the big picture, which was invisible to most other politicians, to see the final distant goal and to plan many steps ahead, and not just for tomorrow or the next election. This man understood perfectly well that some problems cannot be solved in one fell swoop, with one order or one battle. For example, the abolition of slavery was a very complex and long process that required time, careful preparation, legal registration, namely the adoption of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which required ratification by many states, and most importantly, choosing the right moment for action so as not to harm the Union or cause new, even deeper splits in society that could become fatal. He did not try to jump over stages, did not force events that should have matured naturally and been accepted by society, but methodically worked on each task, knowing that small, consistent steps, sometimes imperceptible at first glance or not bringing instant glory, will eventually lead to a great and final victory. Lincoln was like an experienced builder who erects a huge, majestic building brick by brick, slowly but confidently, knowing that each brick in its place is important and necessary for the strength of the entire structure. And while many politicians of his day thought only of the next election, of their own short-term popularity, of today's headlines, or of immediate financial gain, Lincoln thought of the country's future for decades, if not centuries to come. He had a clear vision of what America should be like after the war, an ideal future free of slavery and strife, strong and united, and he based all his decisions on this grand, far-sighted vision. He was focused on the ultimate fundamental goal, a strong, united, and completely free state that would be an example to the world and would last forever, embodying the ideals laid down by the Founding Fathers. He never allowed short-term defeats, failures, temporary difficulties, or harsh criticism to distract him from this great strategic goal. He never lost sight of it, even in the darkest hours when many around him despaired. Abraham also did not give in to the pressure of the crowd, did not listen to the cries of newspaper headlines or politicians who demanded immediate, easy victories, quick and easy decisions at any cost, sometimes even rash and risky ones. He was ready to wait for the right moment to act, even if this wait was painful, caused misunderstanding and constant criticism of him by the public and his comrades who did not see his big picture. This does not mean that he was passive or inactive. On the contrary, his famous quote about giving him 6 hours to chop down a tree and spending the first 4 sharpening the axe perfectly describes his approach to planning and preparation. He believed in careful, long and painstaking preparation that guaranteed success and minimized risks, not just blind luck or snap reactions. But the question remains, why was this so important to his political survival and success in such a difficult era? Lincoln, on the other hand, maintained a remarkable calm and composure, even when things were going very badly, when the army was losing battles, when his own popularity was plummeting, and when his decisions were being questioned and harshly criticized from all sides. He could survive temporary defeats and setbacks because he always saw the path to final victory, to the bright future that he envisioned and toward which he moved steadily. He knew that not every single battle would be won, but the main thing was to win the war as a whole, to achieve the main goal. It was this that helped him to maintain his sanity, not to despair, not to succumb to depression, and not to give in when others in his place would have long since given up. Having lost all hope, he was capable of deep analysis, cold calculation, and long-term planning, which gave him a colossal advantage over his rivals, who often acted situationally, without a clear strategy, and without a view to the future. We know that the Civil War lasted 4 long, grueling years, with the Union Army initially suffering many painful defeats and the Southerners winning significant victories, demoralizing the Northerners and angering the populace. Many people were tired of the war, and they demanded that it end immediately at any cost, simply to stop the bloodshed and suffering. Dissatisfied factions within his own Republican Party, as well as opposition Democrats, tried to weaken his power, if not remove him from office, accusing him of incompetence and inability to lead. Lincoln faced enormous pressure before the 1864 election, when many thought his chances for re-election were very low because of his military failures. But Lincoln did not succumb to this pressure. He knew that he had to continue the fight until complete and unequivocal victory was achieved, and the Union was finally restored to its borders and slavery abolished. He understood that a quick peace without complete victory would only postpone the inevitable new and even more terrible conflict in the future, which could destroy the country completely and forever. His patience, his tenacity, his iron will, and his strategic vision of the future eventually led to a success that not only saved the country from disintegration, but also changed its face forever, making it truly free and united. He demonstrated that great achievements require not only courage, but also enormous patience, endurance, and the ability to see beyond immediate problems. And our video is coming to an end. But before that, let's look at the fifth secret, which was very important because it was the power of words and communication. Of course, politics is often compared to art. Abraham Lincoln's art was not in painting, music, or sculpture, but in his unique ability to speak, persuade, inspire, and effectively communicate with the widest range of people. He was an amazing orator, a true master of public speaking, and a virtuoso of words. He knew how to convey his ideas to the people so that they were understood by absolutely everyone. From simple farmers working the land to educated lawyers and generals in the army, from professors to ordinary workers, his words had tremendous power. They could lift the spirit, unite people, and give them hope in the darkest times. Lincoln always used simple, straightforward words and sentence structures in his speeches and letters. He avoided complicated, flowery language, abstruse phrases, and bureaucratic turns of phrase that might alienate or confuse people, especially in moments of national crisis when utmost clarity was needed. His speeches were clear, direct, and sincere, and reached the heart of each listener, evoking a deep response and understanding. He often told stories from life, used simple analogies, and even subtle, unobtrusive humor to make his ideas accessible, understandable, and memorable. Abraham also deeply understood that the most important thing in communication, especially for the leader of a nation, is to be understood, and not to seem the smartest or most erudite. He appealed directly to the common sense and feelings of people, building a bridge between himself and the citizens, laying the foundations of trust. He had his own conviction and inspiration for the masses to fight and unite. He did not simply inform people of what was happening at the front or in politics. He convinced them of his rightness, of the necessity of sacrifices, of the correctness of the chosen path, and inspired them to action, to fight for common ideals. He could explain the complex reasons why the war had begun, the vital importance of the unity of the country, and the moral evil of slavery in such a way that people began to believe in his ideas with all their souls and were ready to fight for them, even at the cost of their lives. His words inspired soldiers on the battlefield, gave strength to civilians on the home front, to mothers and fathers who had lost sons, and strengthened their faith in the final victory, even when hope was small. Thus, Lincoln was not just a president, he was a source of hope, a symbol of fortitude and a moral compass for the nation, who pointed the way to a brighter future. Also understood that symbols have a huge, almost mystical meaning in the public consciousness. They affect people's feelings more than logical arguments, uniting them around common ideas and values. Even during the bloodiest war, when many doubted the future of the country, when cities were destroyed and thousands of people died on the battlefield, he insisted on continuing the construction of the Capitol Dome. This is the building of the U.S. Congress in Washington. It was the most powerful symbol of the fact that America believes in its future, in its democracy, in its steadfastness, and that it will exist and prosper, no matter what, even during the most terrible war. This majestic gesture, visible from afar, showed the world and his own people that Lincoln was absolutely confident in the final victory and the bright future of the country. It was not just a construction project, but a powerful visual message about the inviolability of the Union and its ideals. Let us not ignore the fact that he often spoke to people at public meetings, held meetings, wrote letters that were later published in newspapers, and actively used all the press available to him to constantly communicate with citizens, keep them informed of events, and explain his decisions. He always tried to explain to them why certain decisions were made, what was happening in the country, and where it was heading. He did not isolate himself from the people behind the walls of the White House, but tried to be as open, honest, and accessible as possible in his communications, which ultimately earned him the deepest trust and respect, even from those who were initially skeptical or hostile. He was a president who spoke directly to ordinary people, understanding their worries and hopes, their doubts and their sacrifices. Why was this so important for his political survival and success in such a difficult era? In a democracy, the support of the people is the most important and valuable asset for any politician. It is the basis of his power and legitimacy. If a politician cannot explain his actions, convince people of his rightness, and inspire them to common efforts, he will very quickly lose power and trust. which in a war would mean defeat and chaos. Lincoln used his words as a powerful weapon, as a tool that helped him unite the nation, maintain the morale of the army and citizens, and maintain faith in the future when there was little hope left. His speeches were not just words, but powerful calls to action that literally changed the course of history, shaped public opinion, and gave strength to continue the fight despite enormous loss and suffering. His unique ability to communicate helped him maintain the support he needed to win the war and be re-elected. Despite the unimaginable odds and constant criticism he faced from all sides, his words have outlived him and continue to inspire people around the world. His famous Gettysburg Address, delivered in a military cemetery in November of 1863, is perhaps the finest, most vivid, and most famous example of his oratory. It was remarkably short, only about 270 words, which takes only a few minutes to read, but every word of it was filled with profound meaning and enormous emotional power. In it, he explained why the Civil War was fought, recalled the principles of equality and freedom on which America was founded, and inspired people to continue the fight for a government of the people, by the people, for the people. He spoke of the sacrifices made by soldiers and the importance of their heroism for the future of the country, and that their deaths should not be in vain. The speech is still studied around the world, translated into many languages, and admired for its power, simplicity, and timeless relevance. It has become more than just a historical document, but a symbol of American democracy and the desire for freedom for all, inspiring generations of people around the world to fight for their ideals and rights. Today we learned that Abraham Lincoln was not just a politician who accidentally found himself in power during difficult times, but a true master of survival, a brilliant strategist, and a great leader who was able to lead his country through one of the most difficult crises in its history, when its existence hung by a thread. His success was not an accident, not a simple stroke of luck or a confluence of favorable circumstances. It was the direct result of well-thought-out strategies, incredible hard work, self-sacrifice, a willingness to suffer, and most importantly, unique, outstanding personal qualities that were formed over the years of his life and political activity, tempered by struggle and hardship. It was a strong, unwavering belief in his principles, which served him as an unsinkable anchor in any storm and showed him the way even in pitch darkness, not allowing him to stray from the course. Amazing flexibility and adaptability, which allowed him not to break under the most terrible pressure, to change tactics, to look for new, non-standard ways, and to adapt to changing reality, not being afraid to experiment. Deep curiosity and a unique ability to listen to everyone, from an ordinary soldier to a minister, from a supporter to a critic, thanks to which he always had the most complete, reliable, and accurate picture of what was happening, seeing all sides of the coin. Incredible patience and strategic thinking, which helped him see a big, distant goal and go towards it step by step, despite all the obstacles and failures, temporary defeats, as well as the exceptional power of words and a unique ability to communicate with the widest range of people, thanks to which he could inspire, convince, and lead millions of people, rallying them around a common idea. These are the very secrets that helped him not only survive in the merciless world of politics and war, but also forever change the history of America, ending slavery and preserving a single, indestructible country as we know it today. He showed the world that true leadership lies not only in strength, power, or personal ambition, but also in wisdom, flexibility of mind, deep humanity, the ability to empathize, accept the pain of one's people, and, most importantly, in the ability to inspire people to great achievements, to self-sacrifice for the sake of a common goal, even when it would seem that there is almost no hope left. His legacy and lessons are still relevant today, more than a century and a half later, showing us how to lead well, make difficult decisions, unite a nation, and succeed in even the most turbulent, and unpredictable times. He remains an example to all who face challenges that require not only intelligence, but also a strong spirit and an unwavering belief in ideals. His life is proof that character and principles can overcome the most terrible adversity.